Hey y'all, we are back. Welcome back to Booked, Blessed, and Busy. If you were with us last episode, you know that we have been talking about grief. Not the most fun topic, but necessary as we are walking through our journeys. Today we will kind of pick up on where we were last time of like the way that we hold multiple emotions all together. But today we want to start out with a quote. This quote is by Parker J. Palmer, and it's one that I really like. It says, "Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life." Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means embracing brokenness as an integral part of life. Every time I read this, I think about the fact that brokenness is one of these words that I think some people embrace as like, oh, my brokenness before Jesus. And some people like are terrified of and run from because the thought of not being whole in the way that we would think is like terrifying. Like, how dare I not be all put together? And so I think in this conversation about grief, and even where like many of our emotions come into play, things like grace, things like accountability, things like the wrestling through whether or not I'm good enough and all those kinds of things, really highlight this matter of brokenness and like, where do we find ourselves in the process? Do we find ourselves at a place where we are able to embrace this brokenness, as the quote talks about? Do we find ourselves in a place where we have shame around the places of brokenness, or the places of maybe we can call it some incomplete places in our lives that really just are not aligned with our expectations of where we should be? So yeah, and looking at this, what are your thoughts sort of around like, where does grace fall in this conversation? We've been talking about grief and all of the things that we've had to let go of and sacrifice. So now we sit with this grace component. Like, where does that fall in the midst of all of this?
Ooh, okay. So, I mean, we talked a good chunk last week about grief, right? And so, for me, when we introduced the component of grace, I think my biggest thing is I had to give myself grace to grieve those things that we talked about last week, but I'm not going to bring up again. But in the grace that I was giving myself as I grieved, that didn't mean that I let go of all the responsibilities that I had, or that didn't mean that I just stopped caring about where I was, because things had to get done. I was still in school. So I think that's where this whole concept of accountability also came in. I had to hold myself accountable to the work that I was doing. I had to ensure that I kind of just continued along the path of success and just continued to do what I came to lead to do. And so make this money.
Listen, Miss Glory would say you're anointed to study.
And so because of that, I think for me, that's what I think I hold grace and accountability in that regard.
So I have a question then. You mentioned last episode this notion of like giving yourself permission to grieve. Are you equating giving yourself permission to giving yourself grace?
Yes, absolutely. I'm not going to even expound on that because I think you just touched it. I do think giving myself grace was giving myself permission for me. Now, for other people, giving themselves grace may look differently. It could look like giving permission. I don't know. What do you guys think? Gaby's. Just call the people out.
I mean, but I think in my journey of maneuvering through grace, especially in this chapter of my life, it has more so come up for me as I've had to be more intentional about releasing myself off of perfectionistic expectations that I have of myself. There's this whole dynamic of, and I call in previous episode, I let y'all know a little inside scoop about me. I call myself a recovering perfectionist. Recovering. We're in the process of doing some reconstruction, and this is my growing pain, y'all. It is truthfully my growing pain because and not that I'm like hardcore in perfectionism, but I do desire to do well, and I don't like to settle on the enough part of things. I don't want things to be good enough. I want them to be good. I want them to be great. I want them to be magnificent. You know what I mean?
All right, vocabulary.
Yes. You gotta expand.
Yes.
But I had a rude awakening last semester when I had a conversation with one of with my supervisor, my boss, colleague, I don't know which one to call him, but all the things. And we were talking about this idea of good enough. And for me, I began to look at this good enough mentality as an opportunity to give myself some grace and recognizing that I'm not going to get everything right all of the time. And I think this came up for me largely in this chapter of my life because I'm in a lot of transitionary, I'm going through a lot of transition with regard to my job, with regard to being in a PhD program, which comes with a lot of responsibility, education wise, and I feel increased responsibility for my clients as well. And so I want to take good care of that, and I want to be responsible with that. And so a lot of that increased this like idea of, or a desire, I guess, to be perfect and to know it all. But then I had to recognize that I will never, I'm chasing a rat. I'm chasing this cat, whatever the thing called. I'm chasing this thing.
A rat and a cat.
I gotta rhyme, you see that? I am chasing this menacing, object that is just impossible to catch.
Yeah.
And it was driving me crazy. And so I had to recognize that in giving myself grace, first of all, what I had to do in order to give myself grace, I had to number one, recognize that what I was trying to chase is unrealistic.
That's it.
And it was not going to merit me well if I continue on in this mentality of wanting for things to be perfect, neat, and tidy. But what I instead needed to do is shift my perspective and look at this space of my life as an opportunity to be able to learn, to be able to stretch, to be able to grow, instead of trying to present it all well, neat, and tidy already. And so I had to, in the midst of going through this aspect of grace, I had to reassess a lot of who I am as a person, how I choose to approach life, and also just accept the fact it ain't gonna always be the way that I want it to be. And so I had to give myself the permission as well. I think I could also fall in alignment on what you said earlier, Dernique. I had to give myself the permission to be able to grow. Instead of feeling like my package needs to come already fixed, neat, and tidy, I have to give myself the accountability as well through friends and conversations that I'm having to just kind of tell me, hey, Lisa, just take a breather for a minute. It's not going to be like this always. And you're going to get to the place that you want to go. So
do you think you grieve that reality that you will not be able to catch the cat or the rat?
It's a work in progress.
Okay.
Because in the back of my brain, there's a little voice right there. It's a very, very tiny voice
In the back
of
of your
my head.
neck.
I
That's
wish y'all
like,
could see
it's right in the
right
back of my
now.
neck,
In the
y'all,
back
right
of
there.
Close
And it's
to your
telling me,
ear.
Lisa, but you can though. But you can. But then in the front lobe, it's telling me well, the logic and reasoning is in my head. It's telling me, okay, Lisa, no. I have the sense right then. It's telling me, no, okay, Lisa, that's not how it is.
Okay.
So I find ways every day. You got to find that little voice in the back of your head. You got to tell her, shut up. Shut up, remote. and tell her to, focus on what is realistic. So that you can maneuver through this life with purpose.
Y'all talking about voices in the back and front of your head. You're making me. If you got this many voices in your head, we got to get something checked out. As you were talking, I was thinking about like, okay, what does grace look like in my life? And what we talked about in the last episode, grief, and what all these parts look like, in the sense of like grieving the things that need to be sacrificed, and the fact that our first years at Lee or in certain programs are filled with lots of tears. A part of grief that I didn't mention then, but is huge for me, is grieving of like quality time in relationships. Lee, like I mentioned, I came to Lee and you know one. So all the people that I've gained here, all the people that I know here, I've gained while being here. Much of my family lives outside of the country. My parents live in a different state, and many of my close friends are spread throughout different states. And so being here is essentially like, in choosing to pursue purpose and choosing to be at Lee and continue getting my grad degrees and all those things, meant largely sacrificing time spent with those loved ones that are spread all over the earth. Where it's not that I just don't get to be with some of them, but like I'm not really with any of them in any capacity. And so a lot of this grace has come with like, number one, embracing the fact that I'm human, right? And so the fact that I can't do all of these things well at the same time. Like in this current time of life, I can't have these relationships be exactly the way that I want them to be, and have my career be exactly the way that I want it to be, and have my academics be exactly the way I want it to be. But in the midst of this process, grace looks like me being, and I just like the words about to come out my mouth and I just hate it. But grace looks like me being okay with the fact that some of my relationships are not in their best place right now. Grace looks like the fact that I don't get to speak or talk to my family as much as I would like to. And the fact that I am sacrificing many holidays and birthdays and all the celebrations with friends and family that I usually, for most of them, I get to see maybe once a year. And I'm missing, in the physical, missing a lot of those things because of this sacrifice. And so grace is the way that I am. I know it's not supposed to be mediocre, but this is the way that I put in my head, is that, Danielle, like, it is okay for right now that you feel like a mediocre friend, daughter, sister, cousin, niece, whatever, and the fact that you're not able to give all that you want to these relationships because of this current sacrifice. And grace for me is letting that be okay, even though it don't feel okay, because I know that it's for a season. Like, and every year I'm like, okay, Danielle, you need to be better in these ways. Like, call people more, or try to visit them more, or travel more. And then my schedule shows up, or the syllabus shows up, and I'm like, there's no way that I can travel this semester like the way that I would want to. And a lot of the grace has come with like, is this okay for right now, at least? Like, this is okay because you are human and you are here to do a thing. And so grace is allowing myself the space to not be hitting 100% in every area of life, but knowing that for right now, I'm trying to hit 100 academically, and that means it's taking away from some of these other things in my life, like relationships. But you know, this is for a time, and there will be a time where I can put my all again into seeing loved ones and spending time and having all the time on the phone that I now need to sacrifice. Grace is painful for me. The grief is painful, and the grace is painful because it feels like I'm not hitting maybe a standard that I would like for myself, or a way of being, a way of life that I would like for myself. But it's also acknowledging that I'm human and that I have a certain capacity. And so I am trying to live a rhythmic life, a life in rhythm where I, you know, lean into some things and lean out of some things at different times, and understanding that balance in the way that I would like it is just not possible at this point. So
you talked about grace in your relationships, right? But the way we talked about grace for the most part is how we view it in the view of ourselves, right? So I feel like me and Lisa, we've had this conversation a little bit ago in the summer about grace and accountability with other people, right? I'm chuckling because this is definitely something that I have struggled with for a while. Just if I give somebody too much grace, then I feel like I don't feel the justice in the thing that they have done to me.
Justice.
Yes. But if I hold somebody too accountable, I feel like I'm not being fair. And so how now am I able to find the balance of grace and accountability? That has been, I think, something that I'm still figuring out, honestly. Like,
And the thing is, I think
all your baby coming
up. To the point that you're sharing, I think that it is a very cumbersome experience to try to figure out how do I hold grace and accountability in tandem, especially because different relationships and different people are going to require different things from you.
I want to give everybody the same
energy.
Yeah.
The same energy.
You do me wrong, accountable. Blah, blah, blah.
But see, that's the thing is though, is that I think it required, at least in my experience, I think it has required me to go back to the drawing board and reassess my expectations for people and my expectations for myself in relationship, and to make sure, number one, that has been established, because I can't hold you accountable if you don't even know what my expectations are.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So I don't think that that's a level of fairness that exists in relationship. If we continue to maneuver through and desiring for you to be a certain kind of way, and I'm not willing to engage in conversation. So that's point number one. And I think the next thing too is also being able to acknowledge different people's capacity, because my capacity to understand and my level of insight might be completely different from Sally. Sally's my infamous person that I like to refer to, who just doesn't exist. But my capacity for understanding and engagement would be different than Sally's. And so I have to, number two, also be cognizant of that. And recognizing that her willingness and her ability to be able to engage in accountability or grace might look different. And I have to look at her situation of life. What is going on in her life and her experience that may be, that I need to be cognizant of as I'm having conversations. But I think all of this, though, is a very sensitive space when we're talking about grace, especially, and even we could even tie in here little aspects of forgiveness as well, and the difficulty that exists there when hurt is truly been done.
Hold on.
That's enough.
Grace,
Oh,
no, hold on. Grace and grief wasn't bad enough.
I mean, we got to talk about forgiveness too.
No. Grace and grief wasn't bad enough for you.
She won't put forgiveness.
Listen,
in there.
we want holistic
I feel like she just
healing.
punched me.
I just talk about I want to hold people accountable.
Holistic healing. That's what we talking about, man. We gotta get into nitty gritty stuff.
But I will be honest though. I think once I start to explore this concept of grace and accountability more, I think my empathy folder for people
you bring a good point.
expanded.
It does.
Because when I am able, like you say, to look at the person in the situation and say, you know what? Let me just look at what you have going on and figure out where grace and accountability comes in. That changed the game for me. Like, I just throw an empathy out of people nowadays.
Yeah.
I still think, though, I'm not disagreeing, but I think empathy is one of those things that can still cause us to lean one way too much, right? So I think there's grace, right? And we extend grace, and then we get to this place of like, okay, it's been enough grace. Now I want to move into accountability, and I want to hold you accountable for your actions. Then when the empathy step in, I feel like the empathy has the potential to, and the tendency to, lead us back to a place of grace if we're not mindful of what's happening, right? Empathy often, I think most times when people operate in empathy, it's a place that leads to grace, and more grace, as opposed to like, I am completely empathizing with the fact that you are in a low emotional place and your actions still are not warranted in this situation, right? I get to hold these two things at the same time in a way that I think empathy, when people think of empathy, they think of like, oh, it's okay because you were suffering. It's okay because you weren't feeling well.
No.
It's okay. It's okay.
No.
That means
it's
I
okay.
understand.
I'm
just still wrong.
I understand, but I will hold you accountable. You can know
I'm
how
just
I feel.
saying, this is the tendency. People think
true.
because you're empathic, I should understand. And like, yes, I understand. And it still wasn't right.
Yeah.
And for some reason, in many people's ears, the fact that I say it still isn't right erases the empathy.
Well, it sounds like somebody need to mature. Let me stop talking. But let me sit down. Because I think you're hitting on some significant points, though, Danielle.
The people want their edges back. You just come in.
They want their edges back. I think you're making a good point, though, Danielle. But I say that kind of jokingly, but I'm being very serious in terms of maturity in these conversations, though, because to be able to hold the concept of empathy that we're talking about, to hold forgiveness is what I introduced, but y'all didn't want to talk about it. Next season. To hold this element of grace, all of these different things, they really require an intentional evaluation of self, and for the other person to also want to hold responsibility as well. And this is now where we bring in the conversation now, reciprocity, and then holding these things together. We can talk today, baby.
But the thing
y'all ain't want to talk.
Hold on though.
Whoa. My God.
My water.
My God. Reciprocity.
But what do you do when the reciprocity isn't an option for you and you genuinely have to just hold grace and accountability for that person like you just have to hold it in tension. And I don't think that, for me, I always thought it's either highly accountable or highly gracious, which I now know doesn't have to be.
No, they could both be.
Yes. And so, what happens when reciprocity isn't an option and that person don't want to be responsible for that?
It's adjusting your expectations and adjusting your investment.
Ooh.
No, seriously.
It's adjusting. So based on, because she's talking about maturity, right? And so if you're not able to give a level of reciprocity, my expectation of you will change because I know who you are and I see it in the fullness. And
your patterns are telling me.
Exactly. And so in response to what I'm reading from your patterns and behavior, I now get to decide how much investment I'm putting here. If I'm putting $100 on the table and you're going to put $1 on the table, then I'm definitely picking up my 100 and putting down maybe a 20. Right? Because there's a different level of investment. Again, if you feel the need to put down the full 100, God bless you.
If you feel the need to also put down $1, I give you permission.
Right. But we get to adjust our level of investment if we need to based on the full information that we're getting. So if I still decide to leave $100 on the table, I can no longer call you wrong because I saw your $1 bill.
For sure.
Right? I saw the patterns of who you are and decided to still invest my full self. I get to shift these things if I want to.
And that is still, need to repeat that, because I think people think that once they in on something, they don't they can't shift. No. Like, you can't, this is the expectation I came in with, and so I'm going to keep that. Or this is the,
that may be expectations, but that's without information, right? And informed expectation says something different. With information, we get to make clear decisions.
That's it.
But here's the thing. I want to dial us back to what we were saying earlier. We have to, cause these are things that have to be communicated. Because if you're maneuvering through, and more so I'm talking about the expectations component of it. Because if you're maneuvering through a relationship with somebody, and we're talking about this idea of accountability and grace. If we're maneuvering through these things, we're not willing to communicate them. It puts us in a space of repetitive cycles where we keep missing each other. And when we are willing to effectively communicate, and granted, I'm taking an acknowledgement here. It takes two to tango. And if two don't want to engage into that conversation, it's going to make it difficult to be able to engage in this whole concept. And so I think as we're talking through all of these major tenets, I think we're talking about how we can possibly engage in this conversation. But I think it's important to acknowledge as well that it doesn't go as easy and as smooth as we're talking about. It has a lot of rifts and a lot of very
it's tight.
Difficult. It's tight.
It's tense.
It's tense, man.
Rough.
It's not comfortable.
Like there are some days I have to wake up still and be like, you know what? I actually have to choose some grace today for this person because I really want to hold them accountable. Like I agree. It's hard.
And then the point that you're saying too, as you're talking about every day choosing to do that, I think this is where we could bring in the conversation of thought as well of like even the Imago Dei, and thinking about how I can see Jesus and I can see God in you. Because let me tell you something, my flesh sometimes don't want to be nice.
You want to choose violence.
I want to choose violence sometimes, y'all.
I really wake up and choose.
But Jesus, no, she really wake up and choose violence, y'all. Except they don't talk in the morning. But we have to choose Jesus sometimes.
Wow.
And choosing Jesus means
that's like a wristband. Choose Jesus.
Choose Jesus.
Choose Jesus.
Y'all, because someone gets some response for your people. choose Jesus today. And honestly though, because I think in all, and Lisa, and this is how I see it from me, I feel like I have a responsibility in the way that I maneuver through things. I may feel, and how you talk about it, y'all, like holding my hat, because I feel a responsibility to represent Jesus in all that I do and all that I say. But at the same time, you don't catch me for no fool. You know what I mean?
Yes. That's why when I pick up the 100, I'm not putting down a $1, I'm putting down a 20. That's me choosing Jesus.
Right.
I'm still gonna give a little bit more than you.
Interesting.
Right.
You know, I'm not matching you tit for tat. I'm not going down to the $1. I mean, if you want to go, God bless you. But you know, I might put down the nice 20. That's Jesus in me.
Yes. You got to let the Jesus, which Reverend Wells used to say in high school.
Let the Jesus in me. Love the Jesus in you. You're easy. So easy to love. Which is not true.
We try it. It's not a perfect process, y'all. We try it. Y'all, that's Reverend Wells, who was our high school guidance counselor back in the bombers. So he used to tell us that every time he went on the mic to speak. But I think, at least for me, this is something that I have to be intentional about as we're maneuvering through this idea of like grace and accountability.
For sure.
I got to go back to the source and originator of this concept. And I got to allow for him to be a part of this with me.
The ultimate one who extends
The ultimate
grace.
one who makes it and who has given me grace and who holds me accountable.
Oh, for grace.
Oh my goodness, y'all. The song. Play the song.
Oh my gosh, that was an amazing point, Lisa, for real, with that whole concept of Imago Dei, because you have to be able to see this element of grace and accountability in yourself, like you say, to now be able to see that Imago Dei in other people. That is tough. And that don't mean that like we've said, that does not mean that every single day we want to choose it.
No, it's an intentional decision.
Yeah. And even so, I was going to ask you this question earlier when you said, how do we hold grace and accountability in tandem and extend it to other people? And I was going to flip it back and say, well, how do you do it for yourself? Right?
Yeah.
And I think in this process of holding people accountable and extending grace and looking at people as the Imago Dei, the question then lends itself, how am I also the Imago Dei? And if I am going to choose Christ for other people, right, and the ways of Christ for other people, how do I also choose Christ for myself? Right. I think often what some may lean towards is holding grace for other people and holding our own selves accountable, right? And we like accountability often is the only thing that we will hold for ourselves, and everybody else gets to have grace for whatever thing they did. And for us, you want to talk about forgiveness. Forgiveness is the thing that we don't want to extend to ourselves. And so if we are looking at this holistically, grace and accountability, the Imago Dei, the image of God, how do I see other people as the image of God? I think a great landing place is, how do I see myself as the image of God? And what does that mean for me as I'm learning about what this looks like for other people? How do I do the same thing for myself? How do I embrace brokenness in a way that allows me to really see what wholeness can look like in these ways? How do I continue to ask myself questions on a daily basis? How do I choose Christ on a daily basis in a way that allows me to hold myself well, and really honestly treat myself as Christ. Like, y'all, all right, for real. And this is our last note. But if we're looking at biblical things, right, the concept of grace and accountability is not just something that we created. It is actually biblical, right?
Yeah.
It is a level of accountability that holds me to repent, right? That holds me to ask God for God's forgiveness, and a level of grace that God empowers me with in order to fill the gap, right? In the spaces where I lack. And I don't want to say this like in a metaphor, but if God is holding me to a certain standard and I miss, right, and my foot slips, the grace of God is what carries me to the place that I should have been, while the accountability of God is what allows me to recognize that I need to shift my ways, turn my ways, repent, and be better. And so in the same ways that we follow these things on a biblical level concerning sin and those kinds of things, we get to extend this to ourselves and to other people. And so we are, we're on the journey. I think you can clearly hear that we are definitely in the middle of it. We have not figured this all out. On a daily basis, we are challenging ourselves and challenging each other concerning what this looks like for our lives academically, professionally, and relationally. Thank you so much for joining us again. We hope that this was helpful to you and that you continue to challenge yourself as we have been in a very real way. Thank you again for joining us as we pursue purpose. See you guys next week. Bye.